Well, if you buy a Mac, you pretty much have to max it because you're never going to be able to upgrade it unless you get somebody with a soldering iron.
That's why very precise.
Yeah.
Not that might be operating system. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like terrible, but because everything's soldered to the board, and is even more now since everything, all the new ones, it's all on a chip. The whole system's on the M1 Pros and Maxes. I mean, so at that point, soldering is not even going to help you.
Right.
Unified memory's on the chip. So only thing that's going to help you there is a credit card and Apple. Send me a new laptop. Well, I always need the floor in my bathroom got a little off, so I had to shove one of my MacBook Airs under the right side of my scale. Gonna wedge it up.
Do you use them as door stoppers?
It's actually not a bad idea. It would work. Because I got this robot thing that vacuums my house.
Roomba?
No, her name's Tabby.
Is it Dyson? Which
Are
company?
you talking about your wife?
Yeah. No, it's like a Roomba. And so it gets stuck on gets stuck on things.
Do you have a Mac Pro?
No.
Would you buy a Mac Pro?
No, because I move around a lot. So I my only desktop I have is my VR machine. Well, like I go to coffee shops and things like that. Although I do move around significantly more than you probably think I do. Yeah, but at least I'm walking on it.
Oh, yeah.
And I run into my knee surgeon like the grocery store and stuff like that. And he's like, and he knows, like, you know, when I meet with him, he's like, I'm going to be a bad patient. He sends me to physical therapy. I'm like, I'm not going to do it.
I mean, he gets paid.
And so they sent me to Aurora's physical therapy, and I fired them after the first meeting because he gave me a bunch of exercises to do. So I went over to my buddy's place. He owns Freedom Physical Therapy, and they do like dry needling, and they do all the work to it. So I don't have to do anything. I just lay there. And then they give you exercises, but I just say, don't waste the paper. I'm not going to do them. It's perfect.
Have you ever gotten
KTK.
KT tape?
Oh yeah. Where they do that from like my posture. Yeah, that's not gonna work. I mean, when you put a bunch of weight down and you start twisting, I don't think any tape's gonna help with that. Although I've lost about 70 yards on my drive after post knee surgery. It's pathetic. What's this?
I thought you were about to say 70 pounds, and I'm like, what?
There was a lot of bad cartilage in there.
What's the goal?
For what?
With
$120.
That's
Ain't
not
no
even
way.
healthy.
I want the ultimate before and after picture.
Like, you know, being a $120 or being a $120?
Being a $120.
I don't think that's.
So I want to go 408 to 120 pounds. You have the before and after picture. Then you go on to, all the shows.
You can do American Window.
Yeah.
Lift some weights.
With your height, you'd be a stick.
Okay, your ideal weight, what are you, 6'4"?
6'5".
Yeah, 187 to 229 pounds.
Yeah, that's ideal. You can go underweight.
Like 180 is not healthy. You're burning a lot more calories.
My current weight's not healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't mean you should swing the other way.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
'cause you're on one
By the way,
side.
all this is on the final, just so you know.
I'm glad I have to.
This is all on the final.
Oh, yeah.
So what's the lightest I can get and be alive?
I would say probably
You can be
170.
alive if you want 20, but don't.
You're not gonna be alive for long.
Really?
No.
That's so extreme.
Yeah. Think how about
That's like a freshman in high school.
I'd be like super nimble.
Super nimble. What does that mean? You fall over and break.
At what point am I going to be able to dunk?
That's not
Uh,
not related.
Unrelated. Yeah.
Wait, I was like the only white guy in high school that could dunk. I was 6'5", 230.
Okay,
I mean, I wasn't doing like windmill stuff, but I could dunk a full-size basketball on a 10-foot hoop.
Okay, Emily, if you were to lift weights, what would the
Can you call
body
that?
mass
Yeah.
minimum body mass percent?
Probably not quite, Jordan or Giannis level, but I mean, Giannis, you see him squeezing the thing, but I could hold a ball like this.
I mean, most people should have 10 to 12%.
That's about where I'm sitting. I hate all you people.
Yeah, all right.
I really hope this is being recorded.
Yeah, it's recorded.
This is a public conversation.
We should have the live transcript on.
You know, Dr. Whitman, I sympathize with your beef pain side. So I'm here. I have five exercises
For what?
for me.
Oh, well,
Anyway.
they're overrated. I'm just waiting for the Terminator legs.
Me personally, I would like to continue walking till I'm 60.
Actually, what I want is I want him to be able to take the entire head off and then put it on one of those like spider skeleton robot things.
Why not just pull the brain out?
Yeah,
Why even keep the head?
yeah,
Well, why would I want to get rid of this beautiful face?
Yeah, I knew that's where I was going.
yeah. Okay, I need to create a robot or a robot for you and then we'll
Yeah, I want all 8 legs though, so I can like come in and like, they're climbing up on desks and stuff.
Okay, why are you reminding me of, I think it's the second Mummy movie?
I've seen all the Mummy movies.
Yeah, the second one, Mummy movie, the Scorpion.
Oh, the Scorpion King.
Scorpion King.
Yeah, well, that was a spin-off.
Yeah.
That was The Rock.
That was The Rock. The Rock.
The Rock was in Scorpion King.
No.
I'm telling you, he was the Scorpion King.
I.
All right, let's look
So
at.
how long till you run it back?
It'd be a cool thing to say I did.
There's one that goes from like Fort to downtown Milwaukee.
Kind of want to do like Tough Mudder. Isn't that the one where they electrocute you?
I think that's the one where they like run through mud and they have to like go under the barbed wire.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's like electric fence stuff
Oh, yeah,
in it. Yeah.
You know, I don't think the idea is that you get shot. I think the idea is that you don't get shot.
What fun is that?
Get it like tattooed on you. That's all.
I don't think people want to. I'm gonna do this marathon.
Yeah, you cross the finish line, they give you the one size fits all medium t-shirt. I survived Tough Mudder. I'm wearing it as a bandana. All right.
So what's going to be on this?
Well, first of all that stuff. Everything we just talked about is
All this stuff.
Okay, what's- what is-
Final exam starts.
question number 1. Describe the correct next Survivor series.
You should actually create a final exam on them. No, yeah.
Okay, we get.
Question number 2. What's the minimum survivable weight for a 6'5" male?
That's so funny. You know, you should just have like a 100 level class for all of these.
Yeah.
So teach us how to.
Oh, actually, I gotta extend that question though. What's the minimum survivable weight of a 6'5" male who identifies as hash browns? Oh, the buttery ones, the crispy with the like cooked all in butter. I love those.
Like the fry looking ones?
Like real hash browns, not the,
Oh, okay, gotcha.
yeah.
Like-
Like that changes the answer.
It's just clarifying, you know, we have to ask these clarifying questions.
Don't you see somebody tried to stab Chappelle on stage?
What?
Yeah, Dave Chappelle was given he was doing his comedy thing the other night, and some dude ran up on stage with some sort of, I don't know, fake, fake gun with a bayonet thing on it and try to stab him. Then Chris Rock came out and says, was that Will Smith? He said it. True. So there's video.
I have, I question why.
He was laughing at first.
Like, why do crazy people do crazy things?
Yes.
That's what happens.
Will Smith was laughing at the joke originally.
Yeah, yeah.
And then his like wife looked at him really angrily, and then he walked up and like slapped Chris Rock or something. And then
Well, that was like a month and a half ago. This is new. This was just like 2 days ago or yesterday.
What? Something happened with Will Smith again?
No, Dave Chappelle. Somebody tried to stab Dave Chappelle on stage.
Apparently they can't fit them.
Yeah, they did. And apparently Dave Chappelle went backstage and tried and helped beat him up. He came out and told the crowd about it. All right, hold on. Let's focus a little bit. I'm sure I'll get off topic again.
Well, that just happened.
It feels like you're like 45 seconds behind on this entire conversation. It's like just dragging. What's up?
I toned out for a little bit.
Yeah, you think? And you're like at ground zero here.
I was focusing on eating my lunch.
We had some very important conversations, and all of that will be in the final say.
I'm guessing they're not.
No. Well, because a lot of the stuff, I mean, I'm only going to have some things from the prior to the midterm, things that were missed a lot. Well, I'll get there. But a lot of the stuff will be since midterm. We should also know all 4 Ninja Turtles, including colors of their bandanas and weapons. Yeah. You won't have, I mean, I would say that there's a chance you'll have to write a little bit of C, but it won't be like you have to write perfect C. I would have the expectation that you're not running this through a compiler or something. There's probably a better chance that I would give you some code written in C and say, what does this do? Pretty similar thing with the Java stuff. So anything I ask you to do coding wise would be, the expectation will be write it in the language that we worked on it in, but so not pseudocode, but the expectation would be there might be some syntax errors or something like that. So as long as I get what you're trying to get at is fine. But there'll definitely be conversion, at least one conversion question, probably just one conversion question. And that could come in the form of convert a number, or it could come in the form of data sizes. Like, how many kilobits is in 13.2 terabytes or something like that, So know both of those things. I would be surprised if the fork system call doesn't make it on there in one form or another. That could be like kind of like a question where I show you some code and tell you to tell me what this guy does. Nothing with files. Definitely no threads versus processes. That kind of bridges pre-midterm and post-midterm. I would say there's a chance I might ask you kind of a scenario question that leans on the side of the advantages of threads versus processes. We talked about that a little bit, I think last class, about spawning off too many child threads, where threads are sharing all the processing power with the parent, processing time, and that's not an infinite amount of time. So that is a consideration with a thread versus a process. So you don't want to necessarily have this idea that threads are better than processes because they're newer. They're different than processes. Nothing with files. They're stupid. Definitely know about process IDs. There might be a scenario question. I have a feeling there's going to be at least a couple of scenario questions where I give you some kind of scenario that deals with, like, here's a problem that we're trying to solve. Give me a proposed solution and defend it or something like that, like why you might use threads versus processes, or maybe something with interprocess communication, shared memory versus a pipe or a socket. You can think of pipes and sockets as relatively equivalent to each other. We've worked a lot with sockets the second half. Probably no, I don't think I'll do any code with signals. They're kind of stupid. Well, they're important, but they're so old school. We have replacements for them now. Yeah, I think there's going to be a question that is just this picture with a question mark after it. And there's only going to be one correct answer.
Shard memory.
Are you gonna have to say IPC or IC?
Direct, come on.
No, to be this picture.
Can you put this picture on the final though, just to look at the work? Would it be funny? You won't put it on.
Direct
Finals are very
communication.
serious business.
Yeah, I know.
Make it a limited question and have the answer be yes.
Oh, did you see I graded your grad exams?
Thank you.
Good job.
Yes, my way for you.
That was after my death march of grading the 2 sections of 548 during all the, it took me 2 NBA games to grade those the other day. 125 exams. We got a bunch of new grad students. Yeah, we're doing okay, but that's a lot of. I'd have 2 classes just started for the next, so I'm teaching Monday through Thursday the next 2 months. It's golf season, so I'm starting class at 7 a.m. Definitely a chance of shared memory on there. Shared memory is not stupid. I like shared memory. The purpose of shared memory, living outside of the protected memory space of a running process. Nothing with file locking. Know the concept of critical section. We talked about that before. We also talked about it after the midterm. We've been dealing with it in terms of synchronized methods in Java, which protects more than one thing from accessing some code. Maybe understand this also in the context of when we say is something thread safe. When we say if something's thread safe, we're effectively saying that the run method of that thread is typically it's a collection, like a list or something like that. If multiple threads are interacting with that list at the same time, the list is considered to be thread safe because it has built-in mechanisms to make sure that 2 things can't change the same thing at the same time and leave the list in a bad state where not everybody has the same current state. So it has protections against changes. Semaphores are good. I like those. Yeah.
So the thread safe things still have like problems if like something is waiting to read index 2 and then something else comes in and then get rid of index 1 and like make sure it's covered?
Well, I suppose it would depend on how they've implemented the thread safety. So if something says it's thread safe, I think the lesson is that whenever this resource is being changed, access to that resource is completely locked down for even reading. That's probably the implication of thread safety, so that you don't need to worry about anybody accessing something that is currently being changed. Could be more sketch than that, but effectively it would be protected by a binary semaphore at some level, right? Where that resource, in order to do anything with that resource, read or write, you have to go through a binary semaphore. And as soon as somebody grabs that resource, they're the only ones that can do anything to that resource. Generally, we would say that, oh, reading from something isn't a problem. Well, if the thing is currently being changed and you read from it in the middle of it being changed, you might read an old value when technically a new value is what's intended. You could almost think of thread safety as kind of almost like a design pattern, where it describes a desire, not necessarily an implementation. Related to race conditions, so be familiar with what that phrase uses. It might pop up kind of, and I wouldn't ask a question like what's a race condition, but could pop up in one of the scenarios, or it might be something where you say, hey, this a race condition could occur here where two different things are trying to access the same resource at the same time, and this is how I would protect against that kind of thing. And those would probably come in the form of not writing code to do it, but explaining your approach. I think we had one question like that on the midterm, if I remember correctly. So I'd say for interprocess communication, definitely shared memory. And then I'll probably have questions that leverage more on sockets than pipes. So I probably won't have anything that specifically asks any questions about pipes. We've done a lot with sockets since midterm. All right, so definitely thread stuff. I guess this would be fair game if I happen to be looking for like a filler question and wanted you to tell me the difference between pipes and sockets. I don't think it's all that interesting of a question, so I'd have to get pretty desperate. I might even say I would maybe throw another, no, I probably wouldn't throw another conversion question on there because it's not related. There'll only be one conversion question. Fair game, but I don't find it overly interesting. Definitely the concept that we talked about more recently is how do we identify a running program across the internet? That idea of IP address plus port. And that's how we effectively expose a unique process ID running on a certain machine, because if you're having two different computers talk to each other, that process ID is effectively meaningless. You have to have some way of finding out about this computer and what port this guy is listening on when you're communicating with them. So that kind of gets into this stuff. The only important thing from here would be IP addresses and the ports. We gave meaning to all this stuff by showing the bigger things. So this would be more of a maybe a network class that would talk about the stuff that's in between. But for us, it's really IP addresses and ports. Similarly, we've talked some in here about like routers and things like that. I won't ask about that on the exam. I mean, it's important for us to think about some of the limitations if we're writing some network code and I write a server on one computer and it's sitting behind your Wi-Fi router. Is anybody else actually going to be able to get to it? That's an interesting thing for us to kind of consider and know that might exist. But the idea of, you know, doing port forwarding or something from your router to that specific port on an internal machine isn't really this course content. Definitely socket communication. The idea of input streams, output streams. You should certainly be able to set up a scanner and a print stream given a socket. You know, hopefully we've seen with like this, the network programming stuff is like sockets are almost kind of like our strings, where if you have a socket, you have a lot of power to communicate between two machines using the input and output stream. Those give you a lot of power, and we have some different ways of doing that. Probably know the difference between a data input output stream and a scanner versus print stream. the idea of writing a byte at a time versus writing a string at a time. Similarly, reading a byte at a time versus reading, I think we usually read strings. You could technically use a scanner to read different kinds of data types, but reading strings is different than reading and writing a byte.
Yeah, I was gonna ask for data input outputs for writing bytes or string transcript.
Yeah. And scanners for reading in strings. Data input stream would be for reading in a byte.
Okay.
You can also use them for reading in collections of bytes. We didn't use it for that. We always just wrote one byte or read one byte, but there's other versions of the read that take in, it probably took in like an int array, probably called buffer, that says it allows you to read in up to like, 1,024 bytes at a time. And then the read method would return the number of bytes it actually read in. So you would know how full that guy got filled up.
So essentially it's a scanner and a print string versus a data
Input and a data output. Yep. And when might you use those guys? Because we had an example where we used both, right? Our current example, we're using both, where when we want the two sides to talk to each other, have a little protocol action going back and forth, we're using strings. But when we actually need to send some data, we're going to just send bytes, but we're using the same IO streams, the input and output stream from the socket. We're just wrapping it with a kind of a different kind of competency. Scanners know how to read strings, data input streams know how to read bytes. So depending on what we need to read next, we use the correct tool for the job, but it's actually a wrapper around that same core stream, an input or output stream. So maybe an appreciation for how powerful those individual things are. And hopefully you've seen how, I'm guessing most of you probably had never done any network or socket programming before this class. And hopefully you've seen how it's really not hard, right? I mean, you got a couple little caveats with some stuff, but in general, having two computers talk to each other, have programs running on both is somewhat shockingly easy. In fact, based on the C stuff from the first 8 weeks, you might even say it's easier to have computers on two different machines talk to each other, or on the same machine using sockets to talk to each other, than it is to use some of the inter-process communication stuff like shared memory, wherever. Hey, why not just have our two programs locally open up a socket connection to each other, and yeah, anything we need to send, we'll just send over that. We just kind of hand everybody walkie-talkies, spawn off a couple of threads for them to listen, and you can do that. From a network stack perspective, that probably is not the most efficient thing. Leveraging your operating system to actually do inter-process communication is going to be significantly higher performance, but due to the fact that you're using a lot older libraries, it maybe feels a little bit less convenient to use some of those things. All right. I wouldn't ask you to, I mean, not that it's hard, but I probably wouldn't ask any question on an exam that says, create a thread in Java that has a run method that does something. But if I gave you some code and I asked you what it did, it would be fair for me to have a couple of thread classes or something like that. So you should be able to know when I tell a thread to start what it's doing, and it's calling the run method on that guy, and kind of follow what's happening. Definitely know about singletons. Again, I might give you a singleton to do something, or you might use that idea in one of your proposed solutions for a scenario where you say, hey, maybe I'll create a class that holds on to these 3 different pieces of information so that all 3 of these guys can reference it. And maybe I'll protect some of the things in that singleton using, synchronized or something like that to make sure that 2 different things don't change an array list or whatever. Talked about thread safe already. That was, yeah. I have a feeling It would be fair game. It would be a higher chance of this than that other slide that I said stupid, whatever, to have you compare strings on the exam, knowing that you use the dot equal sign for comparing strings instead of the dot equals method instead of the double equal sign. Double equal sign is the primitive comparison operator. So you're actually comparing the memory addresses of those two guys. I won't ask questions specifically about like how does BitTorrent actually work. True. No, I would say it would be fair game to talk about the need of the tracker server even for a peer-to-peer network versus a client server approach where all data flows through the server. So we wrote our original file sharing thing where the server was a central entity and all bytes flowed through that server versus our BitTorrent setup where we have a tracker that keeps track of the IP addresses and ports of our clients. And then that guy gives those clients the ability to then talk to each other so that we've distributed all the internet bandwidth. But that tracker is still necessary as part of the solution so that the peers can continue to have knowledge about each other. So maybe understand that core concept of when you're doing network programming, there's only so much bandwidth to go around. And if we can distribute that bandwidth across multiple people's computers, you gain potential performance as opposed to bogging down a central server location where you have a zillion clients all using that one guy's bandwidth. That could become a problem. So probably understand that. Nothing with BitTorrent like too deep into because we're really writing a fairly unoptimized wimpy version of BitTorrent, just sending bytes at a time. Actually, we're not even sending the bytes yet, but you know, we're not writing real BitTorrent in terms of optimization, but we're effectively doing something in the spirit of BitTorrent. Definitely know the difference between a socket and a server socket. And along those lines, maybe make sure you know which things block. So like the accept function for a server socket blocks, so it'll sit there until something finally connects. Same thing when a scanner tries to read something in, that blocks. Anything that you throw into a thread by nature doesn't block, even if it's a blocking line of code, because it's running in a thread, it won't prevent something else from occurring. Be able to recreate this exact picture from memory. Yeah, this weird one. And you have to, but you can only use text, so it has to be ASCII art.
You're just doing that because you paid.
I already established that. It's on recording. All right. All right, that's it. What?
Okay, would you say overall that at least from like our perspective, the final is going to be more like conceptual rather than us writing code?
That's probably a fair statement. Code that I would have you write would be more, like I said, if I gave you a socket, you should be able to create the scanners, like know what those things mean using the input and output streams. I would say a majority of the code, I might ask you to read code instead of write code. It would be fair game for me to ask you to do something relatively simple with fork or something like that in a C-like syntax, whether it's perfect C. But, it's hard on an exam to ask you to do too much stuff. And because this isn't like a a beginning programming class where you can just kind of give puzzle questions. It might be easier for me to show you code and have you tell me what it does. So any question I ask that, I am asking for you to tell me as a whole, what problems this solve, not what does each line do. Yeah.
So would you say there's going to be more or less conceptual questions in the midterm, or about the same?
Isn't that what she just asked? I'm guessing more because the midterm had some programming.
I was specifically like
Yeah.
comparing between the midterm.
I mean, I would say that the Java stuff is easier to write probably in most of the cases. But the issue is since most of the solutions require us to like spawn off threads and things like that, I suppose it would be fair game for me to say something like, implement the run method for a thread that, does these things, maybe talks back and forth with a client using a scanner and a print writer, something like that. But I wouldn't ask you to like have something where you had to create 3 or 4 different classes on the exam, because that's just becomes kind of unwieldy. What else? What's up? Well, I mean, I do curve if like the whole class, does terrible, but I mean, but it's got to be like, like if everybody comes in and just turns in a blank exam, it's like just all zeros, and like, no, I'm not going to curve that.
You're saying
Yeah.
you coordinate which question is available.
What if we all actually try and all get a 0? Would you curve it?
What?
I can take that out.
How can you try? Is that even possible? How would you be able to show me that you tried if you literally earned a 0?
Watch me.
But he gets points for like trying. You get like 2 points for the least attempt.
Yeah, I mean, I get some of these things. You can usually tell when somebody gives you an answer that like copied off the internet that like isn't even related to the question. Like that's not worth points, but that's also not trying. If you kind of dance around and you got some, some parts that kind of showed you at least knew what the question was asking. I mean, the bad ones are where you didn't even understand the question. Like you didn't know enough about the concept to know what question was being asked.
I can do that.
Well, then that's not trying. That's incompetence. We don't curve. We don't curve
You curve it?
we don't curve incompetence. And it's the usual policy. If you do better on the final than you did on the midterm, I'll replace your midterm exam grade with what you get in the final. All right, anything else? Oh, I don't think I talked about it because there's a couple people. Well, it's the same as the midterm, but there'll be 10 questions, 10 points each. I'll probably have it up sometime on Sunday, but I'll promise it's up by the beginning of the day, Monday. You just have to do it sometime in a single sitting by the end of the week. Let's say midnight Friday is when I need them submitted, because I'll grade all of them during that weekend and maybe into Monday. But so you can decide how you want to manage your time. But that's the deal. The exam will be designed to probably take an hour. I probably won't put a time limit on it. If I remember correctly, people thought the midterm was too long. There was probably more programming. Was the midterm a longer exam? I thought people thought it took longer than like significantly longer than an hour, if I remember correctly. I've blocked out that trauma. All right. But in any case, time pressure should not be a thing. I'll make sure the timeout is long enough that, it's, if you didn't have time to answer it, then again, you're not competent in the questions.
And then you curve it.
In fact, I might even purposely go the other direction.
I'm with understanding.
Is this?
So I was gonna ask, is there,
Wouldn't it like curve?
will you have an extra pair question?
It depends on my mood when I'm writing it.
So if I send a comment, help increase your morale.
Good, or you might want to play defense because he's probably going to send me some comment that decreases my morale.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I will tell you to be harsh on giving them this.
He gets his own version of the exam.
Fun, fun.
The entire thing is written in base 64 encoded octal.
How does being competent help with the code?
What's this?
To have some questions chicken.
Oh, I do like that
I
language.
get a conversion.
And provide a
I get-
download for
I
the
get
chicken
one
interpreter.
conversion question.
You get a what?
I get one conversion question.
Are you sure you get it right? So I gave a question on this recent exam that a whole bunch, like a lot of people missed. And then they emailed me saying, I got this right, but I didn't earn points. But they didn't get it right, but they were convinced they got it right. And they didn't know the difference between kilobit and kilobyte.
It was a little.
Yeah.
key versus a big key.
But they also thought it was 1,000 instead of 1,024 as the conversion thing. So it was operating off of a Best Buy knowledge, not a computer science knowledge. It's got to be a power of 2. Just garbage.
See, if I were that.
Well, they did that. So I finally just posted about it on Slack and said, for all you that missed this, this is why it was wrong. It is funny how confident they were. Like, this is the right answer. Why didn't I get points?
This is 200.
No, it's a grad class. So I just took off more points.
Grad class? You're kidding.
Yeah, Bible on. That's a new idea. Well, I have scrolls in my office of a student who wrote a book out of the Bible on parchment.
Good they cheated, though, right?
Well, yeah, but I like this toilet paper idea.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm really happy I'm graduating in a week.
Get a dude on toilet paper with a number 2 pencil. You rip it, you start over.
You should do that for Sam.
The whole exam is that.
Like Sam is
Just sketch the 4 Ninja Turtles on toilet paper.
I'll take the 60.
This gets back to the dean. He just walks in, he's like, okay. Just wanders off after that.
How would it be written? Would you unroll all of it first and then write it long ways?
No, wait.
Or would you vote all the way up?
One word at a time on top of each other.
Yeah. And then so when you roll it back up, that's the last word.
Yeah. I like that.
Is it like one word per square?
That's wasting toilet paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just like.
I mean, it's just not, that's irresponsible during COVID. And we probably need to make sure we, whatever writing utensil you use is non-toxic in case of an emergency. If you have to break into your toilet paper Bible supplies. I mean, at this point, we're talking about that's something you might have to do like in a bunker. Only as a last, or when Sendix runs out for 4 hours.
Nice to know if you mark a toilet paper in pen, you use it to get ink poisoning.
Get ink poisoning?
Yeah.
Oh, then it comes back to me. Like, your professor gave me extra credit, and you realize I had to buy 200 rolls of toilet paper for this.
Well, we don't have to buy toilet paper. We can literally just go there for those.
You're gonna steal it from the dorms?
Yes, yes.
All of a sudden-
Yes.
Then all of a sudden, there's like this thing going around campus, about missing toilet paper from the dorms. They're going through supplies like crazy.
It's the toilet paper pandemic all over again.
Oh, then the students just have to blame it on Sodexo. What's up? Well, it depends if the food is causing there to be an increased need for the usage of toilet paper.
Oh,
You following the logic path
I
now?
have heard people complain about their bowel movements changing when they come on campus. or even at home.
This whole class recording is extremely damning. What's this?
I can already guarantee you. and part of
TMI.
that. No.
TMI.
Just hit the nest close to closing time.
Just go to the nest and ask for a big thing of beans, James.
I don't think that's gonna help our constitution.
All right.
Go to Taco Bell.
I don't think that's gonna help either.
So let's see. Do we have time to do this?
No,
Yeah.
Go to Taco Bell at closing time when everyone there is high.
No, I'm not. That's just your location, John.
Yeah, you gotta go to one Sockville.
One time they were out of meat.
Actually, that's supply chain.
They've also been out of lettuce a bunch of times.
What?
But if you go to Taco Bell and they say we're out of meat, at that point, the Taco Bell shouldn't be open.
Yeah.
I worked at a Taco Bell, and the reason for that was supply chain issues usually, or the people who work there are just idiots.
But running out of meat, that's like the main ingredient of your.
There was a time lapse, this most recent, one of these summers I worked there, when supply chain stuff was really bad. Or we got a truck with like one container of like meat, one container of lettuce.
Really? Does
There's
Taco Bell have the impossible beef yet? Do they have
They
tacos
got
made
rid
of
of
it?
it, those are apparently nasty.
I think they just use beans.
They use like, it was based off of like nuts, some sort of nut, plant-based meat thing.
Okay.
Like,
So I think Burger King has the Impossible
it was not
Whopper.
good.
I saw some TikTok video where even the dog wouldn't eat it. But it was that same TikTok video where they tested it with multiple different days and different wrappers and stuff like that. The dog was deciding between Burger King and McDonald's, normal cheeseburgers. I think always picked McDonald's, no matter which wrapper it was in. So it wasn't like a preference of like, oh, I like the color of the McDonald's yellow wrapper or something better. So dogs like McDonald's better than Burger King. Is that true? Is Burger King known to be more fake than McDonald's?
I thought you were saying that.
They picked McDonald's.
I thought you were saying that would be impossible.
Oh, yeah, no, they just wouldn't eat that.
Oh,
Yeah, they just walked away. Yeah, they didn't.
Fast
They
food meat's
they didn't give a
like-
or do something like ridiculous. Give them like the Impossible Burger, like a stapler. And if the dog picks a stapler, I mean that's really not a great sell for the Impossible Burger. All right, what was the homework? Each client connect to each other client and send a request for a single random byte. Well, it's not print out, no. This was that protocol we were talking about a few minutes ago. So let's at least talk about this. So all the clients are now connected to each other. And they have each have spawned off a thread to communicate with each other. And they ask for, I think I probably put in like a byte 5 in the default or something like that, whatever it is. You know, they send a request, do you have byte 5? The client can then reply back, no, I don't. So that's starting the process of having the clients ask each other client for a byte that they might have, and for them to have that established protocol for talking, and that would be using the scanner and the print writer for having that communication. And then assuming they did reply with a yes, then the next thing that the recipient client would be expecting is for a byte to arrive. That is the byte that the client said, I do have. So that would say whether or not you're going to read or write. But in this one, you didn't have to or read or move on to your next client to ask for that that byte. But for this one, it was just having the chit chat between the clients. So this should not have been very difficult, right?
How do you make sure that like one client wouldn't connect? Like, how I'm imagining it is it's like in this little circle where it's connecting to itself rather than another client. How do you make sure this IP connects to this IP? Is that through like the?
Well, the server or the tracker, every single time we update the tracker with a new list of IPs, it did a dump of all the IPs of all the connected clients.
Right.
So at all points in time, every client would have a array list or whatever, a list of all of the IPs, and port numbers.
And then it would create.
So it would connect to each one of those.
Gotcha.
So it would either, one thing you could do is you can have every client connect to every other client and just maintain that connection. So they could always just chit chat with them whenever. They didn't have to reconnect. That way they could just zip down their list and operate off of print writers and scanners and just say, do you have this byte? Yes or no? If yes, read the byte. If no, move on to the next print writer scanner and ask the question again.
Do they have their own IP address and phone number in their own list?
They do, but because they can look at the port number, they can, that's what we talked about last time, is how do they uniquely identify themselves? Because they know what port number that was assigned to them, they could say, oh, this is me. I'm not going to try to open up a connection to me. Since all of them were local host in this case.
So if they were not all local hosts, would you get a thing?
Probably. Yeah, because at that point you would probably not have different port numbers. You know, you would have the client on all of the different machines always listen on whatever the default listener port was for BitTorrent. Because presumably you have one client with multiple threads listening at port 6008 or whatever it might be on every single client. But in this case, since we were testing on a single machine, we had to differentiate them by port numbers, not by IP. All right, so that shouldn't have been very hard, was it?
Conceptually, I just wasn't like fully there.
So it was hard.
Yes, but it should. I thought it was more complicated than that.
So I would have thought this would only take like 20, 30 minutes.
Took me like 20 minutes, but I didn't do it.
Took me like 20 minutes, but I didn't do it.
I did.
I just didn't do it.
It was like I was trying to figure out how to get them all connected, but
See, that's what happens at the end of the year. Everybody just starts sliding into home.
I was kind of lost on the send thread and the receiving thread, so I just established a connection with each of the IPs and port numbers that were in the list, and then kind of say, I don't know, a bit.
Well, did it at least ask the question?
Yeah, it asked the question and it established the connection.
Yeah, I mean, that's effectively what it was.
Nailed it.
But what you're saying is you had every client establish a connection to every other client and ask the question. That's what you're supposed to do. Presumably though, in a real life implementation, you would be asking this client for byte 7. You'd be asking this client for byte 8, this client for byte 9, and then rotating through them. Or you could say, I'm searching for byte 7. So I'm going to ask this guy for byte 7. If he doesn't have it, I'll ask this guy for byte 7. If he doesn't have it, I'm going to ask this guy for byte 7. But effectively, since we're not actually sharing bytes yet, you did the work of establishing the connections to all of them. You just happen to say, hey, do any of you have byte 7? And then they all just said no. I mean, that is still establishing the back and forth protocol between all the clients. Just the question you were asking was for the same fictitious byte all at the same time, instead of only moving on if you got a no answer from them. Or maybe trying to, say, I'm going to try to get, there's 30 connected clients. I'm going to try to get the, 30 bytes that I need from this. And I'll ask each one for one of those bytes and just keep rotating through. I think any of those is probably a reasonable approach. I imagine when they first created BitTorrent, they probably started off with something kind of similar to what we're doing. And then they kept asking themselves the question of, how do I make this more efficient? How do I optimize this more? How do we reduce the amount of chit chat, the useless chit chat back and forth, so that we're spending most of our time actually sending or receiving bytes instead of getting negative answers, something like that. But I think the starting point would be establishing all these different communication channels, and then figuring out how can we talk less. So it sounds like you, given the current context of things, you didn't do it as wrong as you thought you did it. Still sounds like you were incompetent in doing it, but maybe not as bad. Huh? That's pretty bad. How'd your interview go, by the way?
Really well. They interviewed one other person yesterday. Hoping I hear back today. Today.
You'll hear back.
Have they said anything to you?
Who knows?
I know I'll hear back. I'm hoping to hear back, hey, you got the job, here's an offer letter.
All right, I guess we're done. So, questions, comments, concerns, bribes? That's my outtake on every one of my videos. I have to do that for make sure it gets monetized.